Culminating Task Part 2, Why Oslo Should Host the Next Winter Olympics. Today I'm going to be pitching why Norway would be the perfect place to hold the next Winter Olympic Games. Hopefully, you should be able to listen to this audio file and view my PowerPoint at the same time, so it is just like I'm giving my presentation myself. So you are kept on track. Just click the mouse or spacebar every time you hear this noise. Starting off with the obvious, Norway has already hosted the Winter Olympics twice, the 1994 Lillehammer Winter Olympic Games and the 1952 Oslo Olympics. The Lillehammer Olympics were and still are considered one of the best Winter Olympics of all time, which is why hosting again may worry people who would prefer to just remember that great event. But I believe that the Oslo Winter Olympic Games would be a great experience for all. To begin, Oslo is the capital city of Norway and is already home to a growing population of people, as well as being one of the most eco-friendly cities in the world. Because of this, more locals walk, bike, or use public transport rather than driving. These options are perfect for tourists because it is much simpler for them to use these services if everyone already uses them. Driving is an option for those from most of Europe and countries in the European Union, which also makes traveling to and from stadiums an option for those people. Moving on to one of the most compelling reasons that Oslo should host the Winter Olympics, the venues. Unlike most areas of the world who have hosted the Winter Olympics that are unequipped to host, they have to transport snow onto mountains in order to have enough for the races, and they have to build massive jumps in stadiums only to repurpose or demolish them after the games. Unlike these places, almost every single stadium, track, ski, run, and jump is still in full use for tourists and locals more than 20 years later. Not only are these venues still working, they are being constantly updated, one of the ski jumps having just been renovated in 2010, while most places they are out of service. The constant demand and interest in winter sports like skiing, bobsledding, and more from both locals and tourists makes Norway home to over 75 ski and winter sport venues, making it highly capable to host the next Winter Olympic Games. It also helps that the weather there is naturally cold and snowy, meaning that no extreme measures will be needed to put in place in order to keep snow and ice from melting. Other than the venues, hosting the Olympics also brings lots of tourists from countries all over the world, which requires lots of other services for them as well. Norwegian culture is somewhat like Canada's. The people are kind and respectful, but there is not a strong culture or brand that they follow in terms of food and lifestyle. This means that when tourists come from their own country, there will not be a big culture shock for them, other than the weather. Choosing Oslo as a host city for this Olympics was a choice I believe will best suit the many tourists. Not only is it the biggest city in Norway, it is also a mix of different structures and parts of Norway. It is home to the most restaurants, stores, hotels, and people, making it the best option for any services tourists might need. Norway has one of the fastest growing tourist populations over the past few years. This is the result of cruises, free education boosting interest in the country, and the general recognition of Norway being an amazing city, off the beaten path place to visit. Because of this growth of tourism, Norway is completely capable of hosting a large-scale event like the Olympics. In Oslo, there are many high and low-cost opportunities for people to stay. Other than the many hotels located in the city, there are also lodges or cabins around ski resorts open to visitors, and there are also designated camping sites for those who don't mind the outdoors. Even with all of this considered, the last Winter Olympics accepted a whopping 500,000 guests, which is just less than the population of Oslo. Depending on if this number would rise or fall, there is always a chance that extra accommodations would have to be built. This would not be a terrible idea for Norway. Building more hotels or lodgings would invest in their future, because building them in the most famous city allows for even more tourists after hosting the Olympics. Oslo, being the capital city, is easy to get around in through any method of transportation. Unlike other parts of Norway that consist of fjords with long winding roads, Oslo is easy enough for tourists to navigate or just wander around. As well, because Norway is such a spacious country, Oslo is very broad, with lots of room for movement between athletes, tourists, and locals, unlike some other small European countries. Oslo has very low crime rates, and this is because of the absolute no tolerance for crime anywhere in the country. Of course, with lots of people comes crime, so there may need to be increased security in Oslo. Because the city is usually low crime, there may not be strong enough security or police for the amount of people that will be staying there. But hopefully, if tourists follow the examples of their hosts, crime will be lower than in places where crime may be more common, such as in third world countries where the Olympics have been hosted before. For this next section, I would like to state that while doing my research for this project, sources were difficult to find because many of the articles were focused on the recent withdrawal of Oslo as a host city for the 2022 Olympic Games. I tried to avoid these articles so I could be unbiased about the ways that Oslo could be a great host city without seeing all the reasons they withdrew. That said, this next section highlights how hosting the Olympics would have a major impact on the city and country. But I also show how I could believe it could be affected, and not just the reasons why they withdrew. I also underline why I still believe that hosting the Olympics could be a future event for Oslo. One of the main reasons for Lillehammer being such a memorable Olympics was because of the small scale. In 1994, Norway did not have to spend $50 billion to host, which was near the price of the Sochi Winter Olympics. But since a lot of time has passed since 1994 and expectations are a lot higher for host countries, spending that much money on an event like the Olympics would have a big negative impact on the economy, and the money will be coming out of taxes for the locals who already have the burden of the incredibly high price of living in Norway. Also, because of Norway's type of tourism, which is more adventure or environmentally based, it is unlikely they will make back that money during the Olympics because of the types of outings tourists will do in their spare time. On the topic of tourist outings, it brings us to the environmental impact on the area. As I mentioned before, Oslo was voted 2019's Green Capital City in Europe. This title is easily held when everyone in the city complies with the rules and regulations used to keep the city green. But when there is a massive influx in people who are used to their own lifestyle full of waste, this becomes more difficult. The policies in place already to encourage sustainability include absolutely no air or water pollution in the area, and a protection law against any wildlife and bird or environmental impact from tourists. To make sure that these policies are enforced, a fine or ban from the games could be put in place. With more people visiting all the naturally beautiful spots in Norway, there is bound to be some damage. Littering on ski hills, interaction with wildlife, air, and noise pollution are common at games like this, as well as the increased foot traffic. When doing my previous assignment on Pulpit Rock, a popular tourist spot, it noted that increased tourism could lead to the spot being broken and possibly endangering tourists. If Olympic fans increased the amount of tourism to places like that, it would be damaging to the environment. There are little political or health issues to worry about if Oslo were to host the Winter Olympics. The only other impact the Olympics would have is social. Though Norwegians are kind, they are relatively closed off to tourists, wanting to converse with locals, especially if the tourists do not speak Norsk. A lot of smaller villages in Norway may be impacted by tourists from Oslo going to visit, especially if they are not used to tourists who are not there just to ski or hike by themselves. These negative impacts may have promoted Oslo to withdraw their submission to host the Olympics, but I believe that Oslo hosting could bring another side to the new Olympic Games. Using old but still working venues would save an incredible amount of money, and the limited seats would ensure that the number of fans would be limited, so it is not overwhelming. Oslo could also bring the Olympics back to its basics, where people focus more on coming together to celebrate the amazing athletic talents of each country, rather than the decorations and amount of money spent. Audience members would be notified of this before, so everyone would know what to expect when going. This could be a new and memorable experience for many people who are used to the usual over-the-top attitude of regular Olympic Games. Keeping to the style of Oslo, these Olympics could also be the most environmentally sustainable ones that have been held for a while. By focusing efforts on having a different yet elevated experience, making these Olympics one of the best is a very real possibility. In conclusion, with the natural Winter Olympic structure, as well as previous venues, enough accommodations, and the possibility to create a new yet old style of the Olympics,